Welcome to Buckets, brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network. I'm joined by Joe Dellera and Bryan Fonseca, and this is your Western Conference Finals Game 2 Best Bets episode for Friday, May 24th in the NBA playoffs. We'll break down Game 2 between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Dallas Mavericks, with the Mavs leading 1-0. Thanks for getting home for me, Mavs. And the over hitting in Game 1. Thanks for getting over on me, over. It was a really good night for everybody at Action. We all kind of were on the same side. We'll break down exactly what we think about Game 2. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about series props. We will not dilly-dally. I will tell you that you should go to youtube.com/The Action Network. Had a great week of Buckets Live. We'll be back next week with episodes. So you're going to want to go subscribe to the Action Network on YouTube, youtube.com/The Action Network. Download the Action Network app. You're going to find cool stuff in there about where the bets are coming in, where the money's coming in, how professionals are betting these things. You're going to be able to see those kind of things. Plus, you can track both Bryan and Joe in the Action Network app and keep track of all their stuff. Like I said, I'm joined by Joe Dellera. You can also find his podcast, the Cash That Podcast, which you should definitely check that out as well. Bryan's got you covered. If you like sports where people hit one another, you should also check out Bryan's coverage over on the Action Network. Gents, let's get to it. I will go over the market real quick for this. Opened with Wolves minus 3.5 after they lose game 1. It immediately took steam. We were covering on buckets, went to 4.5. I grabbed a 5 just before it started moving that way. Now, what's interesting is there is a -5, -107, but there's also a 5.5 as much in the market. So if you want to grab Mavericks, you can do that. Is a little bit of juice. There are a lot of these lines. The consensus is kind of has to be considered -5, -5, -110. Is kind of the consensus in the market across the board right now. But this is headed towards 5.5 for sure. Total open 208.5 and has moved down to 207.5. Money line, Mavs are plus 180 with the Wolves minus 200. Let's do best bets. Bryan Fonseca, what's your best bet for this game?
I like Timberwolves in the first half minus 3.5. There's also a minus 2.5 out there if you can get it, but it'll probably be 3.5 by tip off.
Okay, Joe Dellera, what's your best bet?
I like the Minnesota Timberwolves -5, -5.5, whatever. I'm comfortable at either number. And I also like Karl Anthony Towns to go over 19.5 or 20.5 points. I expect this line to move by the time, we record this and finish recording this over till, the day of the game. So I like both.
All right. I'm on Wolves -5 as well. Quick episode. We all agree. That's it. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. My thanks, David Payne. No. All right. So let's kind of talk about this. All right. There's a trend. Do either of you raise your hand if either of you have the trend for the teams in this spot after losing game 1? Do you have it?
I know that it's like 60 something percent
Okay.
where they're favored and they're the higher seed.
Okay. So here's the deal. Game 2 after round 1, because we need to take the round 1 stuff and throw it out, right? I think Memphis, Utah a couple of years ago, and Memphis's first playoff run, where it was like Memphis came in out of the play-in tournament and won, and everybody was like, "Hey!" and the Jazz were like, "No." And so, we just take all those out. Game 2 after round 1, you're at home. We're going to assume they're favored. I think we should just assume they're favored, and they lost the first game. 37-12 straight up, so they win 76% of the time. 28-20-1 at 58% against the spread. That's really good. We get about 55%, we're feeling pretty good. Here's a problem. So I looked at specifically the conference finals, which is you've made it past 2 rounds. We've taken out the first squad of fake teams, and we've taken out the second squad of frauds. And now we're into the teams that are left over. And if you lose at home, how do you respond in game 2? 9-7 at just 56%, 6-10 ATS in the conference finals. So, with that said, after now that I've put the fear of God in the two of you, Bryan, what's your cap on why you want the first half on the Wolves?
Well, wasn't prepared for that stat. I'll say this much. The reason why I like first half more than the game is because part of me still can't shake the fact that the Timberwolves are in the conference finals. And maybe that's just me watching basketball my entire life, but they haven't been here since I was 10 years old. I just think that they're going to come out guns blazing in the first half. the defense will lock down, all those great things. Luka won't be probably as comfortable as he was in pick and roll situations, particularly in the second half. Kyrie got off to a good start. That sort of flipped. Maybe there's a continuation from what we saw from Kyrie in the second half, where he was starting to struggle to get his shot off. And many of us at Action projected, like, yeah, Kyrie probably won't have a great series here because Minnesota seemingly has more answers for somebody of his size and stature and even his creativity, as opposed to Luka Doncic, where nobody can probably guard him one-on-one in the series. But I think Minnesota clamps it down, at least in the first half. And, Dallas is a resilient team. Maybe they make it a game later on, but I do think that this should be a Minnesota cover all the way. I just like the first half more. And I think Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns are a couple of guys this is not a surprise, but a couple of guys I would look at to have a good game. Like I looked at Karl Anthony Towns threes, for example, as one of the props. I haven't played it yet. I was thinking about parlaying the first half with Karl Anthony Towns to make 2 threes because 3 was like plus 150. And I was like, I'm not sure he's going to hit over 2.5 necessarily, but I do like Karl Anthony Towns to have a better game and a better response after a slower game one, which again, one of those things where it's like, am I starting to trust Karl Anthony Towns? And this is where we get into the danger zone with this team. So I don't want to go too far, but yes, I trust the defense at least to have a good, promising first half against the Dallas Mavericks team who struggled to shoot threes effectively in that game and didn't really shoot that many of them. I think Minnesota's going to perform better.
Okay, Joe, you're on the full game with me.
Yeah.
What do you think?
My big thing was that to me, I think a lot of us, like you said, were on Dallas in game one. Like it was a scheduled loss, in my opinion. Not that you have like scheduled losses in the postseason, but it was a bad spot for Minnesota. We knew game 7, coming off of game 7 against a team that didn't have to play the game 7, what all the trends are. They really point to the team with a little bit of extra rest. Minnesota came out of a war with the Denver Nuggets. And then, that you had to go deal with a completely different problem, not as much time to prep, less rest time. And I think that kind of mattered. And also from a scheme thing, it kind of added into them, I think, being tired because Dallas really baited them into taking a lot of threes. Like Anthony Edwards took 4 shots from 2. He took 16 shots. 12 of them were from 3-point range. He made 5, so that's good. But overall, like that's not a successful game for Anthony Edwards, like that type of game plan, that type of idea. And Minnesota settled for a lot of those shots. And while they made them at first, it was really kind of buoyed by the fact that Jaden McDaniels just ran hotter than the sun to start the game. And when we look at what happened, I think that Minnesota was baited into taking longer shots. They were baited into taking more threes, not generating contact, not generating free throws. And that was problematic for them. They couldn't get anybody in foul trouble for Dallas. So it's not really great offensive process for Minnesota be taking that many threes, not generating that type of contact, not getting into the interior, not putting a Dallas team into a little bit of foul trouble. And I think that Dallas was able to do that to Minnesota because of the tired legs. Like those 3-point shots, they look enticing. They're shots that, you want to take, but if you're tired, those shots are going to come up a little bit short, and it's bad process, and it's going to allow Dallas to kind of get those easy rebounds, get out in transition, and attack you on the interior. And Dallas really was incredible on the interior, especially from 2-point range, obviously. And the biggest split, and one of the most notable things is, Rudy Gobert didn't have a great rebounding game in game 1, but his imprint on the game was significant. He was the only Timberwolf with like a real positive in terms of plus minus. He was plus 10, and he was able to actually stop some of those looks from 2-point range. So I think maybe we have to see a little bit more Rudy Gobert, but I do question, like, is there going to be a pivot if McDaniels isn't shooting like that? Do we see, maybe a little bit more Kyle Anderson? Do we see a little bit more Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who had a bad shooting night? Those are some of the pivots that I think, but I think that Minnesota, I think it was just a tough spot for them in game 1. And in game 2, I expect them to lock in, have better offensive process, and not kind of fall into that trap that Dallas really laid out for them.
I think Ant's going to have a really hard time in the series.
Yeah.
I think Ant's going to have a really hard time in the series. And checking his points prop over at BetMGM, Ant's at 26.5. I don't necessarily want to get in on that. It's juice under too, so I don't necessarily want to play it under. because he can. The key here is that I can talk about matchups in half court all I want, but Ant can just like, oh, he got a steal and a dunk and did that twice, and that's 4 points, and he hit transition 3, and that's 7 points, and like your overhits there. But I do think it's tough for Minnesota because they don't have another creator. Like they don't really have an initiator, especially with like how the Wolves are being defended in terms of Mike Conley and how the Mavericks are guarding him. And so like that's going to have to be a big key. I did look at this, and this is kind of an interesting question. We're all in agreement on kind of on like this is a bounce back spot for Minnesota. It's a little tough, not only because of the trend that I talked about with the conference finals, but also a lot of this is like, come on, the Wolves aren't going down 2-0. Like that's kind of the idea is like, come on, the Wolves aren't coming down 2-0. Yeah. And you say that, and then it's like, but what if they do? Like what if they just do? And that was kind of where we were at with Denver, right? Is like with Denver, I was all over Denver in game 2. All over them. Like, come on, the Nuggets are not going down 2-0 at home. Whoop. So the trends have not really held up in these playoffs, which I think is tricky. I'm willing to go ahead and lay it just because I do think that I think Dallas isn't like Minnesota in that they're just going to jump all over you. I think Dallas is very much like, all right, I got the split. Cool. Like, we'll go back home and we'll take care of business. Like I do not think that they will push as hard in this game as maybe some other teams would in this spot. An interesting trend here is that teams in the spot. So I mentioned the 6 and 10, right? In terms of conference finals, game 2, lost game 1 at home. The under is 10, 5, and 1. Okay. Small sample. We're talking about 16 games, but I do lean under here. Now, I've talked about in the series preview about how I think this is an over series, was on over in game 1. I do think the over, like I'll be back on over. If the series goes the way I think it's going to go, which it may not, but if it does, I'll probably be on the over in game 3. I like the under here, but my question, Brian, is do we think that this is a game where Minnesota's defense shuts down Dallas's offense? Or the big problem for Minnesota in the second half, like they won the first half when their offense was good and Dallas's offense was good, and they lost the second half when Dallas's offense was okay and Minnesota's offense was hot garbage. So my question for you is, do we think that this is a team, like I'm asking you to make a bet on it. Do you lean Wolves team total over or under in this game?
What's the total?
So total on this game is 207.
Gotta be like 206, right? Or 205 or 105.
For the
I think
for the Wolves is probably So for the Wolves is probably what, 105,
something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if I could
105, 106. Yeah,
I don't know if I could lean over with confidence because I mean this is why I like Dallas in this series more. Even I don't like overreacting over game 1s. I always say weird shit happens in game 1s, but as somebody who's probably been higher than consensus on Dallas post trade deadline, even though I've never necessarily been a Kyrie guy, but this year he's been fine. You know, he's been in terms of, you know, he hasn't been a distraction. And on the court, he's been, you know, great to watch at times. No surprise there. But the thing with Minnesota's offense is, like, as you mentioned, one creator. And this is where I feel like we've kind of been almost overrating Minnesota a little bit, because as good as the defense is, when they have to create shots late in games, and this has been one of the ongoing questions with them throughout the season, is like their late game offense. How are they going to fare against a team who is at least competent defensively? Dallas is that. Dallas is good defensively. They're not as good as Minnesota is, but they can get stops when it matters. And with Minnesota, can you confidently bet on, as you said, one creator? Like, you're kind of banking on, all right, somebody else has to get hot along with Anthony Edwards being able to get them shots, whether it's Karl Anthony Towns or whether it's even Jaden McDaniels, who has had a few out-of-body experiences shooting-wise in the playoffs already.
Joe, do you think this is a Wolves over or under on team total? 106.5 is the number of the market.
I think it's an over, strictly based on a little bit of bounce back. And I think that there were some encouraging things, like especially that you could take away from the first half. Like, I think we should see a lot more Kyle Anderson. I think he looked great. He basically only got minutes in the first half. He had 14 PRA in the first half, and he finished with 15. So like I think that he's somebody that you can use because he can create for others. He's a body that I think you can put. I think you can put a different look on Luka. Like I know that they wanted to use like McDaniels. He's long, whatever. Luka has literally 50 pounds on him, maybe less because Luka plays himself into shape, but like still like he's got like 50 pounds on him. So it's like I get that he's long, but at the end of the game, Luka just put his shoulder in McDaniels, was like, nope, get out of here, buddy. Like, you're not stopping me. And I think that, Kyle Anderson, like, Luka's not the fastest dude. Kyle Anderson doesn't, slow-mo, surprise, doesn't have to be fast to defend Luka. So I think if we see a little bit more Kyle Anderson, I think that should help. I know that we got like that outlandish shooting performance from McDaniels, but at the same time, I think we had bad shooting performances from Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards. Conley had a bad game. Nickeil Alexander Walker, couldn't hit water from a boat. So I think that we have a good scenario here for like a little bit of a bounce back. I think that maybe we see a little bit more Kyle Anderson, maybe a little bit more Naz Reid as an effort to maybe like try to stop or slow down Luka instead of some of the wings. Maybe McDaniels gets his minutes trimmed down a little bit. Maybe that's kind of the way that they try to pivot. But I think that it's an over game to me for Minnesota, as they have a little bit more time to say, like, look, shooting a bunch of threes, like, sure, like we have some guys that can make them. That's not the process that we want. And I think that after having a day to process the film, kind of get locked into a new series, I think this is a better opportunity. And it goes into why I like Minnesota overall too.
So Chris Finch has been a little all over the place in terms of adjustments in the playoffs. And the key is that like he's switched up minutes, but not rotation spots. He's switched up assignments, but not whether or not he plays guys.
Yeah.
So like Kyle Anderson was unplayable in the last series, and yet he played in every game.
Yes.
In the first round series versus the Suns, there wasn't like a bad one-on-one player that couldn't play, but he just shifted around who guarded who, and he still continued to play them. I think that I am of the opinion in this series that he's going to have to get away from too big.
Yeah.
I just think he's going to have to he's got to get away from these, especially the non-Rudy too big. It's the Cat Reed lineups that are getting killed.
They're bad.
And that's not even necessarily their fault. Like, I think Cat as solo big can work. I think Naz as solo big can work. You can honestly do to the Mavericks what every other team tries to do to Rudy Gobert, which is, hey, let's play one big 5 out, space him out, and attack. That's how you should be going to these lively Gafford minutes, is play one big, don't let those guys hang out in the paint, make them cover to the perimeter, and open things up. But that is antithetical to how the Wolves have played all year, and that's kind of tough, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lively was like plus 17 in the minutes without Gobert and minus 15 in the minutes with Gobert on the floor. So it's like it's stark. It's like very obvious Gobert is like going to be the best big in the series. Like that's definitely the case. I think that you can play too big if Gobert is on the floor, but I think you're 100% right. Like I don't really love the Naz Reid minutes unless we're seeing Cat also off the floor, but then you're losing a lot of offense. And then like I think you can maybe get away with it. That's what I'm saying with Kyle Anderson. If you play Kyle Anderson maybe at the 4, you can maybe even play Kyle Anderson at the 5, depending on who's in at the 5 for Dallas. I don't think that that's completely insane, but I think that you're right. The idea that you have to continue to play two bigs. Like I know you want to get your best players, some of your better players on the floor to get the minutes, but in this series, I don't know if it really matches up too well. It might not be a great series for Naz Reid unless he kind of shows that he could cover Luka one-on-one or something like that.
I think Finch is probably concerned that if they go away from the two big lineups, that it's going to just open up more driving lanes for Dallas, who wants to seemingly drive anyway, because they're not taking a ton of threes in this series so far. Right. And I wonder, like, is Dallas's counter going to be, hey, let's figure out more ways to get downhill now that they just have one big out there, that we don't need to necessarily play 4 out and stretch. And for the purposes of shooting threes, you could actually play 4 out with one big and actually open up some driving lanes.
Yeah, the reason I'm kind of key on this with the over the team total is here's why. If the team total is over in the playoffs, Mike Conley's assist total is 7.4. If the Wolves go under their team total, it's 4.3.
Yeah.
And so, however you feel about the Wolves' offensive performance is probably how like there are corollaries, specifically, in my opinion, with Mike Conley in particular as a playmaker for kind of evaluating that. I will say this. So I talked about that 6-10. So we got 16 games where the team lost game 1 of the conference finals at home, and they're playing the second game at home here. The under on that team, so the Wolves here, the under on teams in the Wolves spots team total is 10-6 in those games. So the under has actually largely been a product of both teams, but it hasn't been the defense stifles them and then they blow them out. It's been much more of this turns into a defensive battle in game 2 and the home team wins. So from that perspective, I think I'm going to lean. I think I'm probably getting a bit on the under, and I think I'm going to take Mike Conley under 6.5 assists here as well. I think that honestly might be the case here where we're expecting Minnesota offensive regression. I don't know if we're going to get it. I actually think we just might see Dallas offensive regression to a small degree, and then the Wolves wind up winning this game, maybe closer. I'm hoping that we cover the 4.5 because or 5 because it's tight, but this could be a little tight.
The one thing I would say for like pushback on that, for why I think Minnesota's offense could kind of still see an uptick with the increase in the defense, is Minnesota crushed in transition in this game. Yep. They were plus 9.4 points per 100 possessions in transition, especially off of live rebounds. So I think that maybe that's how they start generating their offense. That's how they get Dallas into rotation. That's how they kind of get better looks, is by, and maybe like loosening up things for Ant, is just saying like, hey, like we got the rebound, run, like let's go. That's the only that's part of why I think that Minnesota's offense could maybe see an uptick too, with like an increased defensive effort.
Luka's point total is 28.5. It was 28.5 in game 1, wasn't it?
Again, I'm a little surprised it's the same.
Yeah, I'm gonna play the over. I know that I think Bryan's probably was saying that he was leaning a little bit towards them playing him better. I don't think they can. I think they lucked out in that first half. I think Luka's gonna eat in this series no matter what.
No, I think they're probably gonna like have a better effort on him defensively, but I don't think they have shit for him. Like I think this is a series where Luka averages like 30 plus.
Jaden's gonna have to be better on Kyrie Irving because that's an okay matchup, and he got cooked. He did better in the second half, but then Luka got going. All right, it's gonna do it for Buckets. My thanks to David Payne, our producer. My thanks to Joe and Bryan for joining me on today's episode. We will be back tomorrow with weekend best bets for Eastern Conference Finals Game 3 of that Derp series, and then we'll be back over the weekend with more with you on Buckets as we head towards the NBA Finals. Thanks for joining us. Make sure to check out Action Network on YouTube as well as the Action Network app. Till we see you again, let's get buckets.